My clock says it's straight up 12 noon. I'd like to welcome everybody to the I-29 Moo University Dairy webinar series that will continue today with a focus on revisions to the USDA milk pricing system with Dr. Lawrence Jones. The I-29 Moo University is a consortium of extension dairy specialists from the land-grant universities in Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and South Dakota. The I-29 Moo University is a multi-state learning collaboration and connects extension dairy staff with the dairy community to share research, information, management practices through workshops, webinars, letters, podcasts, and on-farm tours. To review the archived webinars or for more information about I-29, visit www.i-29moo.com. For Dr. Lawrence Jones, investigating the milk market became his passion when he was working to predict a farm's future milk checks. He applied his programming skills and knowledge of the dairy industry to develop analytical tools incorporating milk pricing data gathered from USDA. Major USDA reports are summarized on his YouTube channel, Market Tid Bits, and in an in-depth analysis presents in a weekly subscription service. The in-depth analysis includes prediction of the weekly National Dairy Products Sales Report, class and component values, along with key elements of milk production, cold storage, and dairy products reports. He actively trades milk futures on CME. His formal training includes dairy science degrees from the Ohio State University for his bachelor's and the University of Illinois for his master's and PhD. His PhD topic was an early application of artificial intelligence, the natural language interface, to dairy management. This was followed by a 6-year stint as a Cornell University faculty position for computer application in dairy management. As I always say, Dr. Jones, the podium is yours.
Well, thank you, and appreciate the invitation to be here. And say the title is Revisions to the Milk Pricing System, and I think it's going to be kind of your choice as to whether you decide them that they're good, they're bad, or they're actually ugly. Now, I did include my contact information here. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and I generally go by Larry. I know it's more official to be Dr. Lawrence Jones, but anyway. So I decided that the best way to start this out is kind of a little bit of a history as to why do we price milk as we do. And I'm one that likes to sit around and think about things. And I've been, for the last year saying, why can't we come up with a better system, than what we have? And I was asked to give a lecture to a early ag business group at a local college. And so a couple of these slides are from that when I decided that what we have is probably what we're going to have here. So dairy products have been around absolutely forever, and I don't hate to bore you with a little bit of these details, but right now we declare class 1 as fluid, class 2 are the softs, that's cottage cheese, yogurt, class 3 is cheese, and class 4 is butter and non-fat dry milk. Now, for these hundreds, and you could say thousands of years, it was pretty simple how we priced milk. And this guy would say, hey, I've got a dozen eggs that if you trade me that bucket of milk, I'll give you that dozen eggs. And so that occurred for a really long time. And then eventually we started building cheese factories. And I'm from a small town in Northeast Ohio, and we had our own little cheese plant. And this milk started flowing to cheese plants, usually by carriage, and then all of a sudden the cheese plants were the ones that are interfacing with the consumer as opposed to the dairy. The things really got a little bit different when we started standardizing milk, and again, I'm going back to 1890, so the plants would say, hey, this guy over here has a little bit more milk, that guy over there has, better cheese capacity. Then what happened is we started finding out that there was starting to be a lot of, I'm going to call it discrimination or favoritism, whatever you want to call it, on dairies. And so then we introduced the federal milk marketing orders. And really, these started in 1937 when you grab this off of the USDA website, but it's basically when one cheese plant has power over all the buying in the area. And so the idea of the federal orders was to kind of smooth that out just a little bit. So today we have 11 federal orders. I'm going to focus primarily on Iowa, which is Order 32. I know some of you might be from Order 30, but I drew all my examples from Order 32. And about 66 to 67% of the milk is in the federal orders. So there's a bunch of milk like in Idaho that is not actually in the federal orders. All right, so where are we at today? So we've really gotten to the point that we have producers with a lot of cows. We have processors with enormous capacity. We have the customer buying from very large stores, retail situations. And so the question became, how should prices be determined and who has the upper hand? Would you allow, for example, the dairies to set the price? I'm sure a lot of you would say, yeah, that would be great. You're going to want much higher prices. Do you let the processors set the price? No, they're going to want lower prices for milk, higher prices for final product. So what was decided is that we're going to employ the government. And so what the government now does is survey what is the price that goes from the processor to the customer, we'll call it that, and they're going to report that to the government. So in January, there were 5 weeks. This usually ends on a Saturday. And the government just sends out a report called the National Dairy Product Sales Report that says, for this week, the plants that were required to report, it had butter at $2.63, and they had 3 million pounds. And so when you get done for the month, you find out that the butter price is $2.60 basically. Then there are a series of formulas, and so what we do is say, what does it cost to make butter? And so the cheese plants and the butter plants agreed somewhere along the lines that says it's going to cost us 17 cents to convert that butter fat into butter. And when you make butter, butter's only about 82.5% fat, so you multiply it by how much butter you get out. Once you've got that, this is the price off of that formula that the dairyman gets for his butter fat. So you take butter, you have a formula, and then that's what the dairyman gets paid. So with $2.60 in January, this is what the butter fat price was. So basically, this gets done for 4 different commodities: whey, cheese, butter, non-fat dry milk. And we have formulas that convert it to butter fat, protein, other solids, and the one that I didn't put on here is non-fat solids. So the way that you look at these formulas is there's a part that's in red that I've got here, which is the cost to convert milk to the commodity. How much does it cost to convert butter fat to butter? And then what is the yield of that particular process? And we're going to focus, principally on butter. Cheese is a little bit more difficult because cheese contains a butter fat component. So that formula is just a little more complicated. But if you keep this general form in mind, that's what we're going to be talking about. So these the price to convert butter fat to butter, and these different things are put in the Federal Registry. And so it's all agreed, lots of hearings, all comes together, and the industry kind of moves forward. All right, kind of with that background, let's come into now what were the changes. So the one we're going to focus on first is the new formulas to convert milk to the components, and this is called the make allowance. Again, that's how much the processor is kind of allowed to spend to convert from butterfat to butter. So this is how they actually changed. And so if we look at this butter one, we were at 17 cents and the processors came back and said, no, it's going to cost us 23 cents. So we want to raise that milk allowance, that make allowance. So all of these went up. And again, I got this from StoneX, and I appreciate the support that StoneX gives me on all of this. And so all of these make allowances went up 5, 6, 7 cents. There's also a piece of that that is butterfat recovery. I'm not going to spend much time on that. And it basically says we're better at recovering some of the fat and some of those sorts of things. But it's a minor component as to what actually changed here. Now, there's no doubt that these new formulas are going to increase the revenue to processors. That's what it was designed to do. And it's going to reduce the revenue to producers. And the question is, by how much? So we have the July classic component numbers. Actually, starting today, we're going to get the statistical uniform prices, but those won't be out till later today. But I'm going to just focus on these classic component numbers. And so these are the numbers that were reported. Again, you can pull up the announcement, and they're exactly the same. There were 4 weeks in July, and so that's the data that was reported by National Dairy Sales Report. So let's put this into the old formulas as well as the new formula. So one of the things that we have to remember is that the price of the commodity, cheese, whey, butter, non-fat, dry milk, was not affected by any of these changes. It's the cost to get that back to the producer number. So in the old formulas, that milk was worth $18.24 for class 3. And the new formulas, it's $17.32. So for 100 pounds of milk, that's a 93-cent haircut to the producer. Cheese price was $1.76. Let's use the assumption we get 10 pounds of cheese out of 100 pounds of milk. That's still worth $17.63. So basically, the margin for the cheese processor came up 9 cents a pound for cheese. Doesn't matter how you look at this, this is going to be supportive for more cheese production. The plants that were not profitable will now be a little bit more profitable. The plants that are profitable are going to be that much more profitable. So this is going to spur more cheese production, which again is one of the unintended consequences of these changes. Now, there are a lot of other unintended consequences, and one of the ones that I feel is impacting the market, because ever since this happened, the market has really overshot the price of milk, is one of the rules of thumb that we've used. So let's use $1.80 cheese for an example. So as Fred and I were talking, that those of us with a gray hair or no hair would remember that we take cheese price, multiply it by 10, we're expecting an $18 class 3. But now that we've got these make allowance changed, that 10 times the price of cheese still holds, but we're going to subtract 90 cents because that's how much money we took away from that milk price due to those make allowances. So now that same $1.80 cheese is going to get you $17.10 as opposed to $18. Now the trade with all their fancy equipment has got this figured out, but there are just times when you see kind of what's going on with the futures and say somebody's just forgotten about this, and we got $1.85 cheese, so we got $18.50 milk, and it just doesn't make sense because these things are completely offset by 90 cents. One of the consequences of this is a graph from one of the analysts that I follow from time to time. And what he did in this graph is look at September milk price all the way back to 2019 and kind of said, well, because this is what happens in September, we're expecting, resistance at $20 to $22. The problem is the September milk price of 2025 is 90 cents difference for the same components as 2024. Anybody that's doing this kind of analysis is absolutely wrong, because it's kind of like comparing apples and oranges once you got to the new make allowances. And I think that's part of what was going on. Now, there are a lot of things going on in the market. I understand this. This is the July contract. We were down here at, 17 something. We ran clear up here to $20.28 and all the way back down to 16 and change, and finally settled in at 17.32. And the whole time I'm watching this, it's like, this just doesn't make sense, except if you take 10 times the price of cheese. Some of these kind of made sense until it fell apart. So again, I think this is one of these unintended consequences. If you have in your mind that milk price should be 10 times the price of cheese, that is no longer true. All right, the second thing that we're going to talk about is they removed barrels from the National Dairy Sales Report. So I kind of went back and said, was this a good thing or a bad thing? So again, what we did in the past is we used the average of barrels and blocks, added 3 cents, and that was the cheese price. And with these revisions, they said, no, we just want to get rid of barrels. They're always the ugly stepchild. We just think that they're pulling down milk prices. So if we go back to 2018 on the National Dairy Sales Report and just look at the spread between barrels and blocks, blocks were up about 7 cents over top of barrels, and blocks are in blue here. Now remember, we add 3 cents back. That's what was in the formula. So there's a 4-cent difference. And so you could say, yeah, this is probably a good thing to get rid of barrels. But the problem is this is highly skewed by the black swan event of the pandemic. So what I did is simply get rid of all 2020 milk values. So I didn't cherry pick or anything. I just said from January 1 to December 31st, let's throw that data away. So now if you look more over time, the difference is only 4 cents. Again, we were adding back 3, so we've only got a 1 cent difference. So we made this change really to hope to gather a 1 cent difference in cheese prices. Yes, there are times when barrels are going to be a little bit higher. There are times when, they run together pretty closely. But having them both in the National Dairy Sales Report kind of is a buffering back and forth. If barrels got extremely high in price, you can actually take blocks, stuff them into a 640-pound barrel, and then sell them as a barrel. And then what that's going to do is lower your inventory of blocks, bring everything back into line. But there are several unintended consequences, maybe unintended consequences of this change. And again, this is from StoneX, excuse me, where we're looking at the open interest of the Class 3 contracts versus the cheese contracts. And these have really come together since July. Well, what's going on here is previously, Class 3 was blocks plus barrels plus 3 cents of the average and whey and butter. So whenever you were hedging cheese, you were hedging both blocks and barrels. Now that we got rid of barrels, cheese is only blocks. So if you want to hedge just cheese, that cheese contract is a lot more attractive to you now than the Class 3 contract. And you could actually argue the Class 3 contract is probably more of a whey hedge than anything else. So we're seeing these open interest change. Now, what does that do to dairymen? Does that matter? Well, one of the things that if you're going to be buying DRP and doing anything in hedging, you want a little bit of swings in milk price so that you can take advantage of, kind of the outliers. And this is going to reduce the amount of trading in class 3 and increase it in cheese. Now, the one that concerns me the most is the fact that if you look at the National Dairy Sales Report, blocks are 40-pound blocks that have to be yellow. And again, we can debate that. I think this was a huge mistake, but we'll leave that alone. Where barrels are 500-pound barrels. So we took these out of the National Dairy Sales Reports. We have no white cheddar that's now being recorded. What this has done is have milk price now based on the lowest common denominator for domestic cheese, because we don't export very much yellow cheese. Most of what the world wants is white cheddar. So again, we just do not export very much of the yellow cheddar. At the same time, we've got no ability now to hedge barrel cheese. So barrel cheese is just kind of setting out there floating. You can't take a hedge position at all on barrel cheese. So it's always important to go back and say, what kind of cheeses do we actually make? And cheddar, including white, is about 28% of the actual total cheese. And this is actually on a downward slope. And so we've been making, as a percentage, less cheddar. The highest one is Italian. And then the next is going to be American, but that's going to include the cheddar in the American. So again, we're now having a price discovery that is getting narrow and narrow on milk price. And just kind of bring this point home, if we look at June, that's where we have all of the data, because we've finished June up here. This is the National Dairy Sales Report. We priced milk on about 44 million pounds of blocks. We produced 1.2 billion pounds of cheese. So now our price discovery is down to about 3.6. That is not a very broad price discovery for the amount of milk and the amount of cheese that we make. So again, I think this has really reduced the price discovery of cheese. I'd love to see barrels back in, and I would love to see something relative to Italian cheeses. You know, and this kind of is driven home by looking at the exports. We just got the June export numbers, and what I always like to look at is what did things get exported at. We were about $1.93 for total cheese price. Total exports were $2.18 a pound. We sent cheese to Mexico, which is going to be more white barrels, at $2.20. All of our cheddar exports were $1.92. So again, this doesn't bode very well for price on the exports, because the cheddar price, which is what we're paid on, was very close to the overall price. Now, one of the next changes was the higher of for class 1. Historically, class 1 skim price was the higher of max between class 3 and class 4. A few years ago, this was changed, and the reason it was changed is when you're using the higher of, it's really hard to hedge and to kind of forecast things. And when they made this change, basically they said, well, over the last few years, the average difference has been 74 cents. So let's use the average of the average of 3 and 4 and add 74 cents. And so the question is, which is better? Well, if the difference between 3 and 4 is greater than $1.48, and where does that come from? That's simply 2 times this $1.74. Then you want to use the higher of. But if they're close, you'd rather use the average, because you're going to get 74 cents in that. So let's go back and look at what's happened over time. And again, this is how 3 and 4 have changed. Historically, 4 is lower than 3. That was particularly true through the pandemic. But there are times when 3 is lower than 4, and right now it's looking like 4 is going to lead the pack here for the next year. But let's just look at this as a difference. So anytime we're in this red zone down here, we would have preferred to use the average plus 74 as opposed to the higher of. I'm going to come back again and argue that this became a huge issue during the pandemic when there was, $11 difference between the two, and everything that we've done, excuse me, has been driven off of that memory of what happened in the pandemic. These will differ from time to time, but there are actually some things about the industry that brings it back together. So again, you'll see it get off and then it'll come back. You'll see it get off and it'll come back. And it's little things like if class 3 gets really high, then the cheese producers may fortify their vats with non-fat dry milk, which is going to create more cheese, will lower class 3 and raise class 4. So there's some things built into the industry that actually don't let these get out of line for very long. The problem with the higher of is how do we hedge class 1 milk? If you're a producer, are you going to be buying class 4 contracts to hedge that, or class 3 contracts? But again, to kind of make this point, I'm going to come back to how should a producer now hedge their milk? And the biggest probably problem is order 6, which is Florida, because they're 77% class 1, much lower class 3, almost none, and a little bit of class 2. So when they're in the higher of class 3, they're going to be 78% class 3. But if class 4 is higher, they're going to be 98% class 4. So when you look out here in the future, should I be buying DRP for class 3 or should I be buying DRP for class 4? Where is my milk check going to be driven? Because there's a huge change whether you're predominantly class 3 or predominantly class 4. But this is also an issue for order 32. These are your numbers from last month's statistical uniform price. You're about 28% class 1. So you're going to be swinging from around 60% class 3, if class 3 is the higher, to about 68% class 4 if class 4 is the higher. So again, you know that you probably ought to hedge some class 3 because that's 32%. The question is, how heavy do you hedge class 4? Now, there were a number of changes that were made to try and recover the money that was lost due to the make allowances. And so the one that you should have seen in your last check is the class 1 differentials. And so this is the map of what the final numbers were. And for order 32, your May check had a $2 location adjustment. Again, I'm going to be looking at Jackson County, Missouri here. For your June check, you're $3.20. And so that's $1.20 higher on your class 1 skim prices. This whole thing was put together to try to offset the pain of the market adjustments, the make allowances that were put into the system. But here's the question that I keep asking about all the things that were done in these federal milk marketing changes is, where does this money come from? And is class 1 really that inelastic? Are we going to increase the price of class 1 and expect there to be no impact on consumption? So to try to answer this, again, this is plant data. It's not necessarily what we're looking for, but this was the amount of milk that you guys have in your federal milk marketing order for class 1. Again, it's seasonal when school's in versus school's out, but this trend line says that this is very much on a downward trend. And so again, we've done some things. We're going to raise the class 1 price, and we're fully expecting class 1 to hold on the demand side and not be impacted by these prices. So the last change is going to occur in December. This one actually hasn't happened yet. The idea is that they want to increase skim components. The idea is that we're now producing milk that's like 3.3% protein versus 3.1, little higher other solids, and so we should increase the components of the class 1 skim. So just estimated your milk check. So for June, the order 32. Overall, in the order, there was 4.13% fat, 3.3% protein, 5.8% other solids. This is what you're going to get paid on the butterfat, protein, and other solids. So where this is going to show up is in your PPD, because you're already paid for all of your components on a class 3 basis. And I suspect you had about a 2173. Now that does not include any co-op premiums, quality, and no co-op deductions like hauling. So again, that was just kind of the market price at Jackson County. So this is the sheet that USDA puts together, and all the way through your calculating your PPD, you're paid on all components of class 2, you're paid on all components of class 3 and class 4. The only place that you're paid on skim is in the class 1 price. So in June, if we're going to use exactly the same commodity prices for cheese, whey, butter, non-fat, dry milk, we're going to have the higher of class 3, again, which is 3.1 protein, 5.9 other solids, or class 4, which is not 9 times non-fat solids. The class 3 skim was 8.55. The class 4 skim was 8.44. So again, our class 1 skim for June was $8.55. We fast forward to December, using exactly the same cheese price, using exactly the same commodities, but now we're going to have 3.3 protein, we're going to have 5.93 other solids, and 9.3 non-fat solids, which gives us a $9 class 3 skim and an $8.72 class 4. So our class 3 skim increased by 48 cents just by changing those components from 3.1 to 3.3. So order 32 is going to increase somewhere between 30 and 40 cents, I figure, for the class 1 skim. And this is 28% of your milk. So again, your milk check is going to be 10 cents higher because of this effect in in December. So where this is going to have a huge impact is the Southeast, because these guys are very high class 1. Those of you in order 30, I mean, you're only 6.4, so this isn't going to impact you at all. 32 is 28.14, as I said. But again, the Southeast is going to love this change, and most of the other federal orders are not going to see a huge difference. So here's the summary that I kind of put together for you. Is we have to admit there was little choice to increase these make allowances. The processors came back and said, we've had increased costs, we have to increase these make allowances, and the squeeze was put on to get these make allowances increased. Now, were there efforts to lower them from where they probably originally proposed? Absolutely. In my opinion, there was an overreaction to the abnormal prices during the pandemic. I would have not gotten rid of the barrels out of the National Dairy Sales Report, and I probably would not have gotten rid of the average of 3 and 4 relative to the higher of. So the big question is, how big are these unintended consequences? These are the things that numerically it's hard to look at, but are we going to see some demand erosion in class one? Are we going to see some different dynamics because we got a little bit more volatility in the cheese prices? So again, will class one be unaffected by these price increases? We really put the price increase back on the consumer. That's that triangle we're talking about. Now, I've read a lot of hype about these, and this is where I probably will get in big trouble, but my belief is that the industry is worse off with the way that these came together than what they could have been. And again, I think there was this huge overreaction. There's a lot of emotion that occurred during the pandemic. We just have to kind of move on from that. That was a black swan event. But my belief is we're probably a little worse off. None of this can be changed probably for another 5 years because it goes through just a tremendous process. I'm going to just give a real quick promotion to my weekly podcast. As I said, this is a $200 subscription if you're interested in it. It's about 20 minutes, and I really kind of dig into what impacted the different things that moved in the market. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is the slaughter data, because I've been predicting increasing cow numbers, and I'm predicting an increase cow numbers in this next milk production report. If you want just more of a quick summary, I do put together a YouTube channel called Market Tid Bits, and basically anytime USDA comes out with a report, I put together a 3 to 5 minute video. I'll do one later this week on how the federal milk marketing data came together as we get it here the next couple of days. So Fred, I will turn that back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jones. We appreciate the information you shared. We're down to about 37 folks. If you have a question and would like to go ahead and unmute and just ask the question directly as opposed to putting it in the chat box, at this point, we'll give a few seconds and go ahead and ask questions. Okay, maybe folks are a little bashful. I'm going to start out with, well, here we got one. How should a producer look to lock in milk prices going forward? That question's from Zach.
Okay, so one of the problems is class 4 has very low volume, and so that is really hard to protect. And so you're going to have to decide which area you're in. So we've done a lot with a dairy in Florida. They're very high class 1. So, and I know Martin Bozak would not agree with me, but what we generally do is we buy DRP against class 4, unless we are absolutely convinced that class 3 is going to be the higher of. And then we're going to sell calls against that. Where we differ from some other people is we only sell calls about 1 month out. And so, for example, we sold calls in September for $20.50. We look kind of a month out and see what the contract highs have been, and then sell enough calls to pay for that DRP. That's what we're doing. The other is if you just see these big swings, selling contracts through your co-op like DFA, it's one we happen to be using here, just doesn't require a margin call. But we're not doing that very far out. We're staying up close. Actually, if you're watching the market right now, September is running up quite a bit in the last few days. We're kind of see where the high is going to be, sell those contracts and let it fade back off depending upon what the spot market is telling us.
Thank you. Larry gives us a question. So is a takeaway that producer milk prices down about 90 cents a hundred in the Midwest? And that was compared to what would have been with no change?
It's probably a little less than 90 cents, but it's going to be order 30 is probably going to be 90 cents. I've been doing some work in order 33, and they're plus or minus, probably 20 cents. The place that just got killed is Arizona. Their class one differentials didn't come up like everybody else's. And Arizona just, they're going to see the full 90 cents, I think. But the higher class, the lower class one you have, the higher the deduct. I mean, they used class one to try to recover some of that 90 cents.
Okay, I'm going to kind of go to the mechanical side here. We're in an area that we have a lot of older processing plants. How much of a disadvantage are these older processing plants in compared to newer plants?
So you're going to be in the federal order, so it's kind of going to get spread across all the plants in that area, assuming that you're in a federal order. In my weekly podcast, I have been a little bit vocal that I think these make allowance changes, these expanding plants, and these cow numbers that are exploding is a race to the bottom. I'm not particularly asking or answering your question about older plants, but they will be, if you're in the federal order, they have to stick to the make allowance, and so the plant might be losing money.
Okay. We've got a couple other questions came in. Larry asked, can co-ops price milk to patrons differently than private companies?
Uh, Absolutely. So what they do is they give you the minimum price that USDA announces. They have to give you the minimum class prices, but there's always market adjustments, and so they can pull it out of the market adjustments. They can pull it out of sometimes we were talking about a co-op here in the Northeast that's going to have equity deducts. They may not give you premiums. Their hauling could be higher. There are a lot of ways to manipulate the price to the dairyman, even though you're all given exactly the same class 3 price. But yeah, so they can't give you a lower value for class 3, but they can really chew it up on the co-op deducts.
Here we have an interesting question. What is the reason the USDA is not announcing the pounds of ESL class 1 skim? They are combining with overages and other source milk and inventory changes. That comes from Ron.
So I'm not an expert on what the USDA is, but I suspect this is fairly new, and I think to use a particular, I think they're adjusting to what Fairlife is doing, and I think it's a process that's being developed. But I'm not an expert on why they do what they do. I just try to understand what they do.
Okay. Dale asks, how about the Northeast? Is that about 90 cents that you were talking about here in order 30?
In the Northeast, I think it's more like 20 cents because we really had a significant increase in the class 1 differential. We went from 325 up to 510, and so there was also a minor deduct in the different counties where we used to see a 95 cents pulled off, but now we're seeing $1.20 pulled off. So again, they did a lot of give and take on those. But wherever you saw a $2 increase in the class 1 premium, you're probably off of that 90 cents by a fair amount. And in the order 32 was $1.20, somewhere in there.
Will the new market order affect exports and imports? That comes from Larry.
So it doesn't. I don't think it impacts imports very much, but I think we're beginning to disconnect the price of exported milk from the federal market data because we don't export yellow cheese. Everything is a premium to blocks. I get that, But if we're exporting cheddar at 30 cents over block price, that money doesn't come to the dairyman. They still get the block price. Exports have been up significantly. Right now, I think we're bumping on the door to knock them back down again. It takes about, I believe, about 20 cents to get cheese to the port and another 10 to 15 cents to get it offshore. So there's a 35-cent spot cheese is going to be like 35 cents below the global dairy trade. Now, right now we're coming up, and I think what's been going on, we were discussing this with another one of my people I discuss a lot of stuff with, is we've been going through this $1.60, $1.90 back and forth, back and forth. We export a lot of cheese, we get short on block cheese, and all of a sudden the price runs up, and then a month later we run right back down to $1.60 again. So very much a yo-yo scenario, but they're not going to impact the price of cheese on these new federal changes.
Thank you. Will there be an effect over time that isn't happening right now?
I think we really got to watch this unfold for the next couple months. There's been a suspicion that barrel prices might run way up. There is a conspiracy on my part that says that if I was running a cheese plant and I wanted to manipulate prices, which I am not accusing anybody of doing, I would make some yellow cheese, dump it on the spot market really cheap, and make the rest of my cheese that I'm going to sell somewhere else very expensively. I can buy cheap milk because I dumped the spot market down, and just increase my profit. So that's one of the things, because again, we're pricing milk off 42 million pounds of cheese a month. It doesn't take only one company to dump 5 loads on the spot market and change that by 3 or 4 cents. And we've seen that happen.
I'll give just a second or two for other folks to either unmute, ask a question, or type something in while we're waiting. We've seen a continuing drift of higher component milk. What's that going to do to these new changes?
So it doesn't actually change. These changes aren't going to be impacted by that, but what it does to the industry is absolutely amazing. Again, either on my milk market tidbit, I mean, this increase in fat percentages has been just unbelievable. I mean, talking about Holsteins in your area at 4.13% fat is just unbelievable from a while ago. At some point, we have to deal with this. Cream multiples are probably going to end up $1.20 or 1.25. We're not going to have really high cream multiples. Right now, they're about 1.28 in your region. That fat's got to go somewhere. Now, the biggest user of fat is actually cheese. We don't export. We export about 7% of our fat or butter. But generally, we don't export a lot of butter. Most of the butter is going to go to Mexico. But the price of butter, whey, non-fat dry milk, and cheese are not affected by these changes. It's taking that to get to the producer prices that has changed.
Very good. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Thank you, Dr. Jones. A lot of information, a lot of interesting perspective that maybe will change some folks' minds on some things. I'd like to remind everybody that we will have this archived. Give us about 4 or 5 days. It'll be on i29muu.com, and invite you to pay attention to your emails. We will have another program next month. Not seeing any questions. I'm going to close out the the program. Thank everybody for attending.
Thank you.